Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this webinar. The reason we wanted to bring you together as existing clients of Tasos today is to just explore opportunities and value around AI-enabled finance. I think there's no doubt in 2026, artificial intelligence has touched all of our lives, certainly in the personal and consumer space, with things, probably the most famous one being ChatGPT, famous or infamous, depending on your point of view. Before we get into our main speaker, I just wanted to set the scene a little bit around human adaptation of communications and travel and how that's influenced our lives. So in communication, going to telecommunication, we started with the written letter, which still exists these days, a fax machine in terms of one of the original electronic forms of communication, through to email, chat, and now we all live in Star Trek with a mobile device in our pocket. We can video call, etc. And certainly in travel as well. The horse and cart used to limit us to a 15K radius where we lived. Then the car came along, and then aeroplanes for global travel. And I think these examples, some of them, they don't replace what we do each day. They have given us flexibility and options, enabled to travel around the world, but we can also hop in a meeting and be with somebody from our own home these days. And I think a good example of this is it provides efficiency as well within business. So we could be hopping on a plane from Sydney to Melbourne for a head office meeting face to face, but that doesn't mean if the same day we had a team meeting back in Sydney, for example, we can always harness the technology there. So just really widens our flexibility and opportunity and efficiency around these tools. Just a small bit of housekeeping today for those who want to post questions in the chat in the end of the presentation, and we do welcome questions, lots of questions at the end. If you don't want to put your name up in lights, you can post anonymously within the chat and still raise your questions. So that is my initial housekeeping. We'll roll into the presentation now. Just to underpin, this won't be a specific project presentation. You guys have probably seen AI demos across different tools. Some of you, I know, have seen OneStream AI demonstrations, but this is really about welcoming Doug and thanking Doug for joining us today to provide some insights and his experience in what he's seen in the market around harnessing that strategic value of AI within finance. So without further ado, I will hand over to you, Doug. Thanks for joining us.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Let me just pull up my slides. And hopefully everyone can see my screen. I'm going to take a little bit of a different track than you may have heard about AI. I'm going to come at it from a customer success standpoint. I'm going to come at it from a use case standpoint and what is the work that AI is doing. And my perspective on that comes from the group that I run at OneStream. We're in business transformation and growth. I'm Doug Orsagh. I'm a chartered financial analyst as well as a certified public accountant. I'm the vice president of business transformation at OneStream. Now, for this presentation, I put tomorrow's date for me because I'm coming at you from Atlanta, Georgia, and it's still yesterday for me. So everyone let me know how tomorrow looks. We can get going. Today, we want to talk about a little bit about business transformation. We want to start talking about planning because planning is oftentimes the entry point that a lot of folks have to get into AI. We want to talk about some of the sensible AI forecast use cases, and then we want to broaden it and talk about how sensible AI, both studio and agents, have been utilized for general accounting. So think about from all the full spectrum, record to report, all the way to plan to act. So a little bit of background about myself and the team I run. So I'm the Vice President of Business Transformation and Growth. I was brought in here about 5+ years ago to create and run this team. I previously had created and ran a team at Oracle called the Enterprise Strategy Team. I'm a recovering CFO. I didn't learn the first time. I had to learn the second time. Still recovering, you never recover. I'm a CPA from PwC, as well as a chartered financial analyst. I was in investment banking before that. And our vision statement is we want to help companies that are either starting or well on their way on that OneStream journey. We want to help TASOLs. We want to help us too to make sure that we're getting and retaining customers as much as possible. Our offerings. Now, you may or may not have been engaged with my team. I have Mitch Turner from my team, works over there quite a bit, but we start with the realization. One of the things that we have at OneStream that's really unique is we go and ask our customers, how have we done? They tend to like us, so they say we've done X. We aggregate that and say the average efficiency for somebody who is utilizing OneStream for consolidation is a 54% improvement in time spent. We start with making sure that people understand the value realization up front. We have a value realization report that's publicly available. Then, early in the engagement, we can help with advisory. Now, that advisory is more of a quick conversation. We'll be talking CPM versus ERP. We'll talk about the industry. Basically, what have 450 other plus customers that have worked with my team, what have they learned? And make sure that you're getting those best practices. We have a value hypothesis where we make assumptions that are based on our experience. We use those realization numbers, and we can put a wrapper to help you understand what the pricing and the benefits are going to look like. We can revisit that advisory near the close. But really, the big thing we do is what we call a value transformation study. And this is when we have full access to you. It's endorsed by the CFO or the C-suite. It's very interactive. Those workshops over a day or two, we'll sit down with y'all. We'll make sure that we understand what you're all working on. Talk to the doers. People are doing the process. We have a maturity model. We'll prioritize. We'll help with the roadmap. Oftentimes, we'll co-author this with some of the TASOLs. We have storyboards, and the storyboards are really the thing that help folks out the most because we look at the process, the problem, what's that OneStream capability, the business benefit, and the value. And typically those are pages upon pages of information that help you make sure that you're addressing the needs that you have. We can put models together in different calculations. Every number and anything we do is a calculation, and every calculation that we have, we're fully transparent. We show where the numbers come from. We show how we did our math. But it doesn't stop once you become a customer because we come back, when we talked about realization, we're going to come back and ask, how'd you do? If you're doing well, that's great. We'll collect the story. If you're not, we have a whole team that can work with you to help you understand just from a process standpoint, a very light version of process mapping specific to those OneStream capabilities. If you want to expand what's your footprint, if we want to make sure that you stay with us and you know everything that's up and coming, and we can do that capability mapping for you. When we think about value, really think about it 4 areas. And this is going to be important because we start talking about AI, and we talk about our sensible AI forecast studio and agents. This is where the value comes from. The first is technical debt. Oftentimes people look at pricing and they say, wow, this is either expensive or inexpensive, but that's really not technical debt. Technical debt is that full IT ecosystem that you're now engendering because of the decisions you made, because of what you're doing. You may have more admins. You may have stuff that's on-prem. You may have disaster recovery. Taking an eye of that entire ecosystem and realizing that OneStream oftentimes reduces that. Efficiency. Efficiency is oftentimes the easiest thing to measure. Hey, we used to spend 10 days doing a task. Now we spend 5. When we talk about our sensible AI forecast, we typically see an 83% improvement in time spent. And that's asking the hundreds of folks who have used it. We also look at just for a regular planning or a closing consolidation, what are those benefits as well? Effectiveness oftentimes is the biggest benefit. When we talk about sensible AI forecast, that's the accuracy. But what does accuracy allow us to do? Accuracy allows us to make those better decisions quicker, whether it's better inventory decisions, whether it's collections, whether it's vendor decisions. It allows us to make those big working capital decisions because we have a better view. The final thing is risk mitigation. We don't want to do anything that's going to increase risk. If you have a bunch of Excel files moving around, typically that's very risky. What we want is to make stuff as systemic as possible and reduce that risk. So that's the framework that we typically look at from your perspective. What is successful? So I want to talk a little bit about our AI offerings, but I want to start, not jumping right into the AI, but I want to start talking about planning, because planning is oftentimes the entry point for a lot of folks. They'll do a forecast, an AI forecast, but what does that mean? When you think of OneStream, how do you think of OneStream? We like to think of it as that unified data model that's on a single platform that can address all your EPM needs. But oftentimes people are looking at a problem. They're trying to solve a problem. They're not thinking about what that unified data model allows them to do. And I'm going to talk about why that's so critically important when we think about AI. Specific to planning, how do we talk about OneStream? So let's get drill a little bit deeper down. Let's go just planning itself. If we're just solving that planning problem, how do we think of it? Well, that unified data model still helps because we're doing that long range plan, that budget, that forecast, and we can do that all within the same system. We can do different scenarios using that unified data. But it also means that when we do that jumping off point to take advantage of AI, we have something that's critical for the success of AI, and that's data transparency, because all the data is in the same spot. So how do we talk about AI? Well, oftentimes when we talk to people about AI, they say, hey, we have an AI strategy. What is it? We got to have AI. That's our strategy. We want to take a step back and say, hold on, AI in finance needs to be solving a problem. That's why I asked the first two questions. How do you think of OneStream? Specific to planning, how do you think about OneStream? And then we talk about what problems are we trying to solve? What is that business problem we're trying to solve? Not what can we apply AI to? Let's take a step back and figure out what are we trying to address? What forecast? And this is where oftentimes the entry point is for planning, because we can take that one forecast that if it's wrong has the biggest material impact. I'm going to talk about some deeper dive in some use cases, but at a high level, we have a big retailer in the United States, and they had a forecast and they had a bunch of different divisions, and they had one division that they were discounting more than anybody else. Well, that division had a less accurate forecast than everybody else. So that forecast being wrong forced them to have to get rid of produce, get rid of things at a lower price. If their forecast was a little more accurate, they're not having to do that. So that had a big material impact. So that's where we focused with them on solving that problem. What forecast process has the highest level of variability? Variability, once again, if it's variable, how do we forecast that accurate? If it's 20% off one year and 20% the other way the next year, how do we forecast that? And the final is, which forecast process is the most time consuming? Because when you adopt Sensible AI forecast, you're going to eliminate time. As I said earlier, it's about 83% improvement in time spent. But rather than jumping right in and saying, hey, we want AI, we got to start with what is that workflow? What is that problem that AI is solving? There was an MIT study that was done back in September. September's about 10 AI years ago, so that was a while ago. But in September of 2025, MIT said 95% of AI projects do not show ROI, which was news to us because a lot of our projects show ROI. It's appreciable. They can say, we used to have 10 people doing this task, we have 2. We used to our inventory, we've been able to reduce it by a day. So what is it? What was causing failure, or at least an inability to ROI projects? What they found is there was 2 things that are crucial to a success of a project. One is it's got to be an existing workflow that we are either replacing or improving. You think about a lot of the stuff you hear in the news today about vibe coding. Oftentimes, hey, I created a great report. I created this great interface. Did you need that report? Did you need an interface? I know it's great. It looks awesome. But what is it solving? Too oftentimes people are doing stuff that's not necessarily solving that problem, that workflow, focusing on that workflow. The second thing is, and oftentimes we see this because data scientists are taking a bunch of data, they're trying to get it together, putting it in Snowflake or some other big data aggregation tool, and they're normalizing the data, which means we have a little bit of a black box because we go back and we can't get any further than where that data has been normalized. So that full data transparency all the way back to the source is key. So the 2 key things that MIT saw, and we also see, It's got to be an existing workflow, and it's got to have data transparency. So with that in mind, I want to jump into some use cases. I'm going to kind of build these a little bit. I'm going to stop in a little bit and explain some things, but I don't want to get too technical. I want to get more about what was the problem somebody was solving and how did they solve it. So let's jump in. The first thing is, remember, I asked those questions. What is that forecast that if it's wrong has the biggest impact? Which one has the biggest variability? So these are some of the answers we got as we build this. Well, here's one of the answers. We're not sure about our inventory sitting in our dealerships. They had sent inventory out to the dealerships. The dealerships would return and respond and keep track of stuff in the Excel spreadsheets they'd send back. We need more clarity on the raw material purchases and manufacturing capacity. So their issue was they had inaccurate demand forecasts. These demand forecasts were causing these problems. So before I jump into it a little further, I want to just say some key concepts, and then we'll get back into the use case. So we talk about targets, and these are unique dimensional intersections to the forecast. It could be price volume on the most easy one, but the retailer I was talking about, they had 3 different produce, raw goods, and materials that they were selling. They also then had the stores. So the targets were those 3 things and the number of stores. Multiply those together. So when we talk about a target, that's the target. We're trying to figure out, in the retail case, how much per store. In this case, we're just talking about, we're trying to figure out what is that amount of stuff we have at the dealerships. What are the things that the dealership's telling us he needs 5 more tractors? We just sent him 5 tractors. Did he really sell those 5? Or are we putting 10 tractors out there, and is our inventory going to be bad? Or we need to have a better understanding of what raw materials we need to build those tractors. So the targets help us understand that intersection of what are we aiming for. Features. Oftentimes people will call these drivers. Now, when you build your own model, oftentimes those drivers are internal. We know those. And if we bring external stuff in, we'll bring it in once a month. What we've done is we've built a library of features that are most common for people to use, and you can pull yours in. Events, holidays, different things are going on, seasonality, just bringing that in as well, because we had one customer, and they had just every July, and they're in Canada, every July, it was all over the place. And so they couldn't really do a month to month. Well, it was moving day. In Canada, July 1st, you can actually move out of your apartment, move into a new one. It's a big national thing. That was actually affecting, that's a seasonal event. So we sensitized that and brought that in. And the final thing is we throw all of this in to the model arena. And the model arena can say, listen, you thought this feature, that this event affected these targets in a certain way, and you thought this had the highest correlation. Well, you know what? It wasn't. Something else did. It allows you to take the bias out of the forecast, have that full data transparency back to the unified data model. And as we've already established, we are replacing an existing workflow, the demand forecast. So let's get back into it. So here's another one. We have a single consumption model run by a single user. So they have one person creating a model. That's a critical man theory. I mean, if that person goes away, we're in trouble. We need better visibility into the projected energy consumption for pricing discussions with the government. Now, this is an Australian company, but we have a similar thing in the United States. We call it FERC accounting. And basically, you can charge your rate based on what you spend. You need to understand what you're going to spend on operations and maintenance in order to set your rate. So having that information and having that forecast as accurate as possible could be the difference between tens to thousands to millions of dollars. So they had a single disconnected model, so in Excel, and every percent of accuracy off was hurting their rates, was hurting what they would bring in from a revenue standpoint. This was Endeavor Energy. And some of the targets they used was they looked at energy consumption by tariff. They looked at energy demand by tariff, and also the customer count. Some of the features they had were volume weighted price of energy per kilowatt set by the government. So we need to know what we can do within the structure. And they want to know Australian energy consumption. They didn't need American energy consumption. They didn't need anybody else. They need something specific to them, so they could bring that in if they needed to. They also need to understand demographics and some of the events, weathers, the min, max, mean for each day, and different holidays. So the result, they achieved overall forecast accuracy of 97.55%. Not bad. That wasn't far off from what they were before, but every little bit helped. And what it meant is that human being that spent all of their time doing that model did not do that model anymore. A 96% reduction in the time it spent to produce that. So now you can produce it whenever you want. You don't have to wait for that human being to be able to be there and do it and spend time doing it. So we're saving money because we're more accurate and we're more efficient. We don't need to have that energy to do it, that time and energy and efficient, and we're much more efficient. So when we look at where the value is, where the ROI is typically with a sense by a forecast, it's going to be you're spending less time doing it. So as people are freed up to do more stuff, but also now you can make working capital or revenue decisions with more accurate data without bias. So hopefully that makes sense. So we talked a little bit about, and I just want to revisit this now before I move on to a broader discussion in our Sensible AI portfolio. So I want to drill down a little bit more on what is a target. So let's say we have 10 product categories and 100 stores. You do simple math, 10 times 100, you have 1,000 targets. So when we do our model, we're looking at 1,000 different targets. The features, maybe it's the CPI, maybe it's the GDP, maybe it's the weather. We have a library that you can choose from, but you can also bring in stuff from the outside. You don't necessarily have to just use what you have. You can use the best and brightest from other folks as well. Then we have the events. Whether there's a promotion or there's something going on or there are holidays or it's seasonality, we can bring that in. And the model arena is where we bring those targets in. We train it on how those features look and those events. And we decide which one really has the highest correlative effect and drives those targets and drives our performance, allows us to be more accurate. And therefore, the forecast results tend to be more accurate. We see a 24% improvement in accuracy typically. And then you can do multiple scenarios if you want. That's the nice thing, is because this is part of your OneStream, you can get other targets, you can bring in other features and events. Human beings are the ones doing these. And here's some of the results that we're seeing. The forecast accuracy is through the roof. We have people that, in the 24% improvement accuracy, think about that. Most of these people are like at 90%. So the average improvement in accuracy is at 24%. What that means is that every little bit has helped. The forecast efficiency is continuously and dynamically adapt to new data. It always is training itself. But it's not human beings that are having to say, okay, I want to try this, I want to try this. It's doing it itself. What we typically see, as I said, 83%, anywhere between 83% to 87%. So 86% is where we're at today, improved efficiency. Example is somebody's taking 10 days to do something, they're now taking less than 2. Transparency, and this is key. We talked about how it's important to make sure we're replacing or using or supplementing an existing workflow. What does that mean? Well, in this case, it's the forecast. When we talk about the closing consolidation, you're talking about data management. We're talking about variance analysis. But there's an existing workflow that we're replacing. That's number one. It's got to be transparent, though. It needs to be able to go all the way back to that source data so we can audit it and make sure we're right. And you don't need to be a coder. You don't need to have a data scientist, although we do find that data scientists do help out with this, but you don't have to be. This is just another piece of the OneStream set that you can use. You can see some of our customers down below. We've worked on over 150 successful projects. The average implementation is 15 weeks. It's actually getting closer to 12 now. And this is something that our partners are implementing. The average accuracy improvement, as I said, is 24%. A lot of these people were at 90% plus before. So this is improving them even more. And the final is 86% efficiency. So that's forecast. That's kind of how people have entered AI. And there's a lot of folks using that for AI. And that's the entry point with OneStream for a lot of folks as well. But it's not the only way. I'm going to give you a little bit of a private preview we did with somebody for Sensible AI agents. Now, for those of you who don't know how our agents work, we really have three primary agents. We have a financial analyst agent. Just think of a natural language data retrieval. In this case, this company was going to use it for inventory. But just think of a financial analyst using this to help himself or herself out. All numbers, all stage data. Deep analysis agent. In the private preview that I'm going to talk about a little bit, they used it for revenue contract assessments. It actually can take the numbers, the structured data, and take the unstructured data from the contracts and get answers that are needed to help understand who has these terms in this contract. Is this better? Can we renegotiate this? Do we want to go after this? Is this something we want to continue? And the final thing is a search agent. A lot of folks are using this for their OneStream support. They can type it in there. It can go not only and find what the OneStream example is or how to use the OneStream tool that they want to use, but also gives examples and pulls out and actually pulls their stuff in there. So, finance analyst, more of just numbers. The deep analysis agent, numbers plus that unstructured data and a search agent can just go and search a real word search for OneStream if you're using OneStream. A lot of people use this almost as their FAQ. So what were some of the results? And this is really interesting. So for the finance analyst, 93% accurate. Well, when I first saw that, when I first was talking to him, I said, don't you want to be 100% accurate? It doesn't mean bringing back the data. This is the people's use. This really goes to change management. People were very quickly able to query the agent accurately. What we find and what you find with maybe a Copilot, Microsoft Copilot, is that number around 15% initially. People are able to hop into this and almost immediately ask it the right questions to get the information they wanted. Deep analysis, think about it. Deep analysis is doing that structured and that unstructured data and bringing it together. There was still a 91% accuracy in their ability to ask questions that got the answers they needed. And search was always right. So just from an accuracy standpoint, just from a change management standpoint, within days, people were able to use these agents as if they had always been using them and get the information they need. So when we think about efficiency, financial analysts was 90% faster. And it was incredible. They essentially created 20 people just with financial analysts, our finance analyst agent. That is, they had the ability, we measured it, the efficiency essentially of 20 people that could do the work, but never went on vacation, never got paid, never took the weekend off. Sounds terrible, but it's an agent, so it's not a human being, but it does the equivalency work of a human being. Deep analysis for the more laborious tasks could be 67% faster. For some of the easier tasks, it was 98% faster. And search was 94% faster than just searching on their own. So the Sensible agents surfaced thought logic to users. They would bring not just, hey, here's the answer. It's here's the answer and here's what this means. And it leverages really, we kid around with the folks here. Well, they're almost cyborgs because where did the agents stop and they start? It required both. It was symbiotic, but they were able to get what they needed. And they were using this for working capital. They were using this for procurement. They were using this just to make sure that the accounting was happening correctly and they were doing the correct things. So it's a little bit different than coming in with planning. Now we're actually touching subledgers and getting information from subledgers and making sure they're right. That's Sensible AI Agents. I want to talk a little bit about Sensible AI Studio. So when we talk about Sensible AI Studio, think of this as almost a code set with some already made routines that you can almost just deploy AI almost immediately. It allows you to scale what you're doing. This is great, but you're going to have specific use cases. I'm going to get to those in a second. You can also take some of these routines that have been built and you can plug and play them into your current environment. So some of the solutions, and this is what we've done is we've worked with folks to develop routines that solve specific things. This means out of the box, they can just take this and go. AI account reconciliations is one. People can use that for their account reconciliations and figure out which account recs have issues and focus on those rather than everything. AI narrative summary, if you have a customer or if you are a customer that has used commentary or has a bunch of narrative that they try to put together every month as part of their variance analysis, AI narrative summaries does it fairly quickly and elegantly. AI system diagnostics can look at your systems and tell you what's wrong. We have some data tools. We also have benchmarking. And I'm actually working with a couple customers right now that have implemented it, kind of going through the private preview for that as well. And what they're able to do is they're able to look at, they have 500 different plus businesses, storefronts, and each of them have similar things. And what they're able to do is they're able to look at not just their revenue, but their types of revenue. They're able to look at their expenses, and they're able to cluster them and figure out, hey, these 5, this is the model. These 5, something's going on. Allows them very quickly focus on what are the issues, not just from a business unit or a storefront, but also within those line items across and see if there's commonality there. And then automated anomaly detection. We already do a lot of anomaly detection, but now it's getting automated where it's just plug and play. These are driven by routines. Now, a routine is there's a code set out there that you can very quickly adapt to what you're doing. It's a little bit different than a solution because a solution is like it looks just like a normal OneStream solution. This can be adapted specifically to y'all. Anomaly detectors, and that's really one of the key things with the Sensible AI Studio. I'm going to show you how that looks from an accounting perspective in just a second. The clustering I talked about the AI benchmarking, the data cleansing. There can be some regression analysis as well. But this is happening. The average time it takes somebody to get some up and running is months. When I say months, it's like 3 months. And some of the stuff like the solutions can be almost immediately. But the routines typically are a quarter and they're up and running. So some of the solutions, I'm going to drill a little bit deeper in here before I talk about a specific example, a specific use case. But AI account reconciliations. So you can bring your account reconciliations again. It can figure out which ones have issues. It can put those to the side and say, these are the ones we got to look at and review. These have no issues. Let's go. They can be reviewed very quickly. The system diagnostics allow you to look at your business rules within OneStream, look at all your data adapters, look at your connections, see if there's inefficiencies there, and recommend, well, how do you fix that? How do you optimize that? Not just say, hey, there's a problem here, but there's a problem here, and here's how we would expect you to elegantly fix it. AI narrative summaries, and this is a game changer. I've actually seen this used a couple times now by companies like out in the field with them where they've reversed demoed to us. And they're able to essentially eliminate the time they're spending on variance analysis because they're able to bring stuff in and aggregate it. And then there's the overall AI data tools. So I want to talk about a specific use case here. So I call this my Fisher-Price accounting flow because most of y'all probably do some version of this. And this is just to record a report. So you have your sub-ledgers and you have your general ledger, and oftentimes those will be in the same ERP, but you do certain things when it comes to getting that data to do that record and report. The first thing is you're going to move the data. You're going to transform the data. You're going to validate the data. You may have some FX. That's your data management line. Then you're going to do your close management. You're going to have some kind of workflow. Some people have an Excel. Some people have it within the tool itself. How do you get your chart of accounts? And those accounts almost immediately are starting to do flux analysis to understand what do we need to do? What do we need to work on? What are my big issues? Then we get to close and console. We're reversing or booking accruals. We're putting allocations, and if we have to have allocations, and so understand that full profitability. If we have multiple business units, we're doing intercompany. That intercompany typically is spreadsheet driven. And then we're doing any kind of journal entries we have to do. Once we get those, oftentimes we're doing account recs after that. We can book any kind of equity. I'm going to come to back to forecast in just a second here. We're going to do our variance analysis. And now we can do our stat to GAAP reporting. We can do our overall reporting. And then our tax people finally get the files they need to do taxes. Now, I want to come back to forecast. Forecast is green because that's not necessarily part of the record report process. But if you're working within a single platform, if you have that unified data model, you can bring the forecast in to inform your variance analysis. So you may have noticed there's some green stars there. I'm going to talk about why. This is the use case part of this. We had a customer in the United States, and they had bought Studio. And they said, listen, we think we know what we want, but can you specifically sit down with us and point out what are the processes during our record report processes that you guys are going to help with? What can you guys improve? So the green stars are data validation. As they're bringing information in, imagine they're bringing 10,000 lines of data. We run anomaly detection on that. Sensible AI anomaly detection. There's not 10,000 lines that have issues. There's 500. Now they're focusing the close on those 500, which eliminates the need to do that flux analysis because now we know where the issues are. We don't have to discover the issues. Just right there, those two green stars are eliminating a day during their close. Then we look at their close consol. We skip a little bit ahead. The variance analysis, using the AI narrative summary, bringing that together. They do tons of commentary, but utilizing that allows them to cut a day off of the variance analysis. Now, they could use that for static gap reporting. That's sort of going to be a phase 2 for them. But we were able to show them specifically how OneStream would help them with their data validation using anomaly detection to figure out what their issues were, eliminating the need to do as much flux analysis. Then on the back end of it, help them with their variance analysis to where it's not a bunch of analysts chasing around looking for answers. It's actually people coming and saying, this is what we do. And not having to ask folks, but aggregate with AI all of their commentary into the narrative supporting that variance analysis. Just those 3 stars cut 2 days off their close, utilizing OneStream Sensible AI Studio. So I want to go a little deeper. When I've said a couple things where I've talked about solutions, I've talked about routines. The nice thing is a lot of these, as we get more and more experience, some of those routines are turning into solutions. We're finding that people use AI account reconciliations quite a bit. So what we're doing is we took the routine and turned it into a solution. You can just plug and play. Same with the AI narrative summaries. Same with AI system diagnostics. So in the previous example, the AI narrative summary, didn't take time for it to fine tune the routine and try to get the routine and code it for them specifically. They're able to just adopt it. Now the routines themselves, we can look at pipeline forecast, we can anomaly detection is a routine. It really needs to be focused specifically on whatever you're doing. And then benchmarking and outlier analysis. We talked about the clustering. We talked about some of the benchmarking. Those routines can be pointed very quickly within months for the routines towards a business capability that you need, a business outcome that you need. So I go back to, I said a little bit earlier, when we look at where are people getting ROI from AI, it's when it is a specific workflow. Go back one slide. A specific workflow. Data validation, the flux analysis, those variance analysis, those are all specific workflows. And having the ability to have that full transparency all the way back allows them to take full advantage of it and see potential ROI. For this company, it was 2 days. Think about the AI forecast, Sensible AI forecast. For the first company, they were able to figure out their inventory on site and cut days off their inventory. They had 140 days inventory on hand. They cut it down by about 10%. Yet Endeavor Energy, just a little bit of improvement in that accuracy helped. And they eliminated the need to have a human being doing that model, being basically on staff doing that model. So there's real ROI there. But the agents, they have people we have essentially created people. The financial analyst created 20 people. That's essentially doing the work as if we had brought 20 more people in to do that work. We didn't have to pay those people. Those people don't take vacation. With the deep analysis, it was like 5 or 6 people. Once again, 25 to 26 people, the equivalent of that, without having to pay for them. We just have more capacity, allows us to scale the enterprise. That's where the real ROI is coming from. So I want to close here talking about our sensible AI portfolio. We have forecast cost and efficiency gains. It's funny. Every day this seems to improve or change, but it's always between 83%, 87%. But we had 85%, 86% improvement. Accuracy, 24% more accurate predictions, and it's embedded in OneStream. Has that full data transparency. It doesn't require coding on somebody's part. You can have the data scientists do it, and we have some companies where data scientists get involved, but it's not necessary. Studio, that's like your little engine that can for AI. Allows you to have this code set that you can use either for those turnkey solutions or have routines that you can build upon. Allows you to unlock that value of the different personas. You can build. You have a power user. You could have an end user. It allows you to really take that routine and fine tune it towards the specific user. And this is one where you do have AI developers in there, but they now have a code that they can develop OneStream solutions with. We talk about agents. You have that agentic and exhaustive search. Allows you to automate stuff that you wouldn't have done. Really, it allows you to scale, but often also get those insights and adopt quickly. One of the things that we see with people adopting agents, they oftentimes get a very nice interface, but getting the detail below that is difficult. With OneStream, because they have that unified data model, because of that data transparency, you're able to get the insights you need. And because it has that financial intelligence built in, you're able to start using it like an accountant or a finance person would use it. It makes sense. You're not having to go back and reconfigure stuff or trying to game the system and try to get the right query in there. People are able to pick it up and use it almost right away. It's within OneStream. One of the things that I see people concerned about is like, listen, we don't really want to use the ChatGPT because we're sending all of our information out there. Now somebody else is going to learn on our information. What this does is puts an enterprise-wide lock on our information. We can bring information in if we want. We're not sharing our information out there. It's within the enterprise. It's really an enterprise data model as opposed to a large language model. And it has that full transparency because it is built on OneStream. So with that, I want to open up for any questions, thoughts, or comments from y'all's side. I'll need a little bit of help here because I can't see everything. So if there are any questions in the chat or if anyone has any questions, please go ahead.
Hi, Doug. There is a question in the chat, which I think you just covered as a summary point, which is what is the benefit of having OneStream specific AI tools versus using a generic Copilot ChatGPT?
Yeah, it's really ease of use. The change management is going to be very quick. So that's number one. Our change management tends to be much easier. Number two is it's an enterprise language model versus that large language model. So everything's contained within the system. We can still pull information in, but we're not having to send our information out for somebody else to learn on. And the final thing is that it's financially intelligent. It's built with accountants and finance people in mind. What I've found with folks, and I've seen them, and we're using external agents for some of the tasks we're doing, the non-financial tasks we're doing internally. When we have to do a report, we're using stuff that helps us build it. But it falls apart when you expect it to understand finance and accounting. And you're saying, hey, go look for this. And think about the deep analysis where I have numbers and I have contracts and I got to marry the two. If I don't understand the financial intelligence, this contract means nothing to me. It's just words. So those are really the three reasons to deal with OneStream versus putting on something like a ChatGPT cover on it, because it's really going to be that ease of use, that ease of adaptability. It's that enterprise language model. And the final thing is it's financial intelligence just built in. I actually helped develop these products. I was giving feedback. This is what customers do. This is what they need. So when we started building this stuff, we're building it on OneStream, and we're building it with the financial intelligence in there. So hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you, Doug. Is there anywhere else you want to go on this call? Any other insights you'd like to add or talk about?
Yeah, I'd like to talk about a little bit about where are we seeing not just our customers, what are they demanding, but also kind of where are we going? And this isn't, I'm not going to give away any details about, development here, but just the market moves so quickly. And there's a concern oftentimes with customers like, well, if I adopt this solution, am I going to be out of date? 2 months from now, I made a joke a little bit earlier that MIT study came out in September 2025, which is like 10 AI years ago because AI is moving so quickly. We're moving quickly too. And I think the focus that we've had when we've developed our AI tools is really making sure that full data transparency is always there. So if you adopt it for a workflow and you have that full data transparency, the interfaces, some of the tools may evolve, our interface may evolve, but you're still going to have that core. So they're going to have that financial intelligence, and you're going to have that data transparency, that unified data model that allows you to always get those answers you need to get. That's never going to change. That's really the core of everything. It really distills it down. I recall, I'm old enough, and I was an investment banker back in the day when the internet really took off. And I remember stuff like pets.com. And I remember stuff like Webvan. Webvan was, and for those of you who remember Webvan was a global company that was going to deliver groceries to your door the same day. And it failed because there wasn't demand for it. It wasn't really replacing anything. Flash forward to today, it'd be wildly successful because it is replacing something. But if it's not replacing a workflow, you're not going to be successful. And that goes for AI, that goes for the internet, that goes for the people who invented the first wheel. Any technology revolution, it oftentimes helps take a step back and really ask yourself the questions I asked at the very beginning. Before you jump in with both feet on AI is, what are we trying to solve? What is that workflow? Find that workflow. What is that workflow we're trying to solve? And let's make sure that we're actually attacking a true problem rather than buying a shiny toy. I walk into companies all the time, and what they say, it's like, oh, we bought this tool and it failed. Why did it fail? Well, the reports looked really good, but it just didn't add any value. Well, it didn't add any value because it wasn't meant to add any value because you didn't address the problem. So the key is, and this goes with any technology, you got to start with, what is that problem we're trying to solve? That may sound overly simple. Sometimes that problem we're trying to solve is very tough to identify. But if we can identify that and then point the tools that we talked about today to that, that's where we see people be successful. That's where there's ROI.
Hey, Doug, we've got one more question come through. Given the advanced modeling that this allows within OneStream, how do you give confidence to users who've never done machine learning before and that they can be confident in the output? Where do you point people? Where do you point people when they ask how the modeling got to that forecast?
Yeah, that is a great question. And that's something that when we first started on this path a couple of years ago, and we had already had our machine learning tool out there, but we have to educate folks a little bit because what they're used to the data scientists aggregating the data in a data warehouse or a data lake or something, and that's where we're getting our data from. What's nice is, since this is in OneStream, there's full transparency back to the source. Now, if your source is just a snowflake, that's as far back as you're going to go, but you can direct connect. You can directly connect back to the subledger where the information comes from. And the model is fairly transparent. If you worked in OneStream before, you can see how they have the auditability. You have the same thing in the Sensible AI forecast. You have the same thing in a Sensible AI Studio. You can drill back to where the information come from. I know we talked to folks about the clustering analysis. The first thing we did for them is we gave them a check. We showed them how the stuff was aggregated, and then how we used that. That step of showing how the data was prepared and staged in order to be touched gave them the confidence that it was the same data that they were supposed to be going back and looking at. So we educated them. It's not going to be necessary for everybody, but understanding that data flow, that data transparency, I know I've said it a bunch and I'm beating it to death, but data transparency really is the key. Not necessarily, you can have great data, you can have okay data. I've seen people with just okay data still do well because they know where that data comes from. They have that full transparency all the way back to the source. That's what we see. That's where, I think the challenge is educating folks that how critically important that is.
Another question, Doug. Is it possible to use AI agents if using console and account recs, or is this only available for planning?
No, you can. So definitely can use it. Planning is oftentimes the entry point, and it was our very first AI product. Was really our first AI solution. It's all one product. It's all part of OneStream. Our first solution was forecast, and what we find is that's where a lot of people get comfortable. That's where they get comfortable with their ability to do it, because it's that one model they're fixing. It's that one forecast they're fixing. They can get comfortable with the transparency back. But we're seeing folks start with Studio and start with account recs and start with using anomaly detection as they're bringing their data in. So I think as people get a little more sophisticated on what AI is and how they can use it, they don't have to have forecasts. They don't have to have the planning aspect of it. It's just oftentimes that's a quick win for some folks. And so they'll go after that. They'll go after the planning first, but you don't have to have that in order to have the rest. You can start with Studio. You can start with agents. You don't have to have forecasts. Hopefully that answered the question.
Thank you, Doug. We've got one more come through. If we have complex business rules that we apply to various parts of our reporting, are AI agents able to understand this and use it when they do their analysis?
Typically, yes. The example I gave you, actually, there's 3 different business units. In the example I gave you for a private preview, I did it on purpose because it was fairly complex. And they have very complex business rules around people in one of those. It's a very heavy people business. We're able to do that and still get that efficiency and get the answers they needed. Now, it's not just something you're going to take out a shrink wrap, and throw the floppy disk in a computer and boom, it's ready to go. My suggestion would be work with the folks at TASOLs to help you make sure that you're cataloging, you understand where those business rules are coming from, what they say, and then let's make sure that we include that in our thinking as we implement and utilize the agents.
Thank you, Doug, for your time today. I hope many of you got some food for thought and insights from today's webinar. If anything springs to mind at a later date, please don't hesitate to reach out to Ben, Jason, or myself. And thank you all for taking the time out today to attend this webinar. And I hope any month-end tasks don't interfere too much with people's public holiday this weekend. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, y'all. Thanks.